Hi there. I hope I am coming in loud and clear. I had some difficulty coming in because there was a software issue. Can you all hear me? Those of you who are live, I hope you can hear me. Testing. Sorry, these technical things, sometimes these softwares, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. And I didn't do anything different, so it's very puzzling. Okay, so I'm glad I'm here. Okay, you can hear me fine. Excellent. So, okay, so let's begin. The inner child shadow work is a very, very vast pool of a work that we need to address, right? There's so much to unpack, and so I've decided to break the live stream into parts because I want to cover as much as possible. It is such an essential part of our spiritual development and our psychological development, and without the the understanding, at least the basic understanding of what inner child consciousness is, it can really prevent us from growing, and then we don't know why we're not growing. Okay, so for the benefit of those who have never attended my classes, my name is Shamla Khan, and I have been a spiritual teacher for a long time now, more than 20 years. And the work that I do would be essentially quite different from most New Age teachers, because my focus is not just on meditating or spiritual activations or light body work. My focus is really on the psychology as as well as addressing the shadow parts of self, and being honest with self, like what are parts of self that is preventing me from growing, right? So this is what I teach my students and my clients. This particular subject is not very popular because most people don't want to do the work. Let's be honest, right? It's just too much work, right? People want quick fixes. People want spiritual teachers to tell them that all they need to do is sit down, meditate, and then they can grow because they are made in the image of God, so they don't have to do anything, right? So it's really quite a lot of false information given out there, which I feel needs to be addressed. So I spend a lot of my time addressing, and if you follow me on social media, you know that I do that quite a lot, right? So I address all of the misunderstanding, misgivings, and so inner child is a big pool. So today the subject is very focused on inner child and shadow work, and how that, whether we do the work or not, right, prevents us or allows us to grow spiritually. So I want to first address, what do we mean by the inner child, right? What is the inner child? Basically, the inner child is part of us, is a consciousness within us, within our own psyche, that retains memories, feelings, and experiences from childhood. The thing is, we do not need to be deeply traumatized. Like, we don't need to have abusive parents. We don't need to have, we can have the most perfect parents in the whole wide world, and we still can have inner child issues, right? Which is, we're all made up quite differently psychologically, right? So even with the best of intentions that your parents may have, they may sometimes slip up and say things that could hurt you and wound you without realizing it. And as a child, as a sensitive being, right? As a child, you may pick it up, right? You may pick up on their stuff. You may pick up on their own insecurities, and so that can wound you, right? And all of these deep wounds within us make up who we are, right? they really determine the choices that we make in our lives, the kind of life partners we choose, the level of confidence we have, whether we have avoidance issue or we are confrontational, whether we are brave enough, courageous enough, whether we tend to just let things slide and allow ourselves to be doormats. All of these things, how the inner child, the consciousness of the inner child and how it's being developed plays a major role in who we are, right? Who we attract into our lives, especially life partners, right? Who we choose to be our life partner. And that's why relationships are so challenging, because they are a reflection of the choices that we have made, the unconscious choices that we make within our own psyche. All right. So a big part of inner child work is learning to integrate and understanding the wounds of the inner child. Because if we don't address the wounds, then how are we going to grow spiritually? We cannot plaster it and hope to, in the New Age, people talk about mass ascension. It's really an illusion, at this point in time. No one is doing the actual work they're supposed to be doing. And what mass ascension? How can you grow, if you don't address the elephant in the room, right? So the reality is work needs to be done. Mass ascension is not a free ride. We don't, suddenly ascend just because we meditate or we just jump on the bandwagon. It's not for free. It's never for free, right? Spiritual growth, you want to become enlightened, you really need to be enlightened in consciousness. All right. So an unhealed and wounded inner child can hinder our spiritual journey because it creates so many psychological mind blocks that we're not able to see. We're not able to see clearly. We're not able to, we don't know why we behave in a certain way. And the unconscious has more power than we realize. Oftentimes people say, oh, I have free choice. Yes, in essence, you have free choice. But the unconscious choices that you make, the unconscious behavior that you have, the unconscious habits that you have, determine the choices that you make. And you do not necessarily have free choice in that sense because they are unconscious, right? They come from the unhealed part of ourselves. So all of these unresolved emotional wounds can lead to patterns of self-sabotage, negative self-talk, and limiting beliefs, right? So, I have clients come and go, students come and go, and the pattern that I've seen with some of these clients and students who come and go is when we reach a point where we really have to address the most sensitive parts of themselves, the most wounded parts of themselves. This is when they say, oh, I need to take a break. I've got other things that I need to do. I don't have time for this right now. And it's a consistent pattern. I've done this for over 20 years, right? So I've seen this pattern. And when they're about to hit the point where they are addressing the most important aspects of their growth and development, it's like digging for gold and you're almost, digging for gold in the mountain or something like that. And you're like 6 inches away from the goal and you leave, you give up because you think that, oh, okay, there isn't anything. So it's the same with these students and clients, right? And they give up just when they're going to hit the part of themselves that is so wounded. It's scary. It's very scary, and you need a lot of courage to address some of these emotions. All right, and that's the reality, and that's why it's difficult, and that's why it's not popular work, right? So a wounded inner child can also make us seek external validation and approval, and oftentimes we project this onto our life partners, onto people around us. We feel like they are responsible for validating us. They are responsible for making us feel good about ourselves. It all comes from the inner child. Okay, we have to unravel all of these and take back our power, take back responsibility, and realize that, that is not the responsibility, of other people to make us feel good. I was dating this guy once, and he was, you know, I would say we were in a committed relationship. We were dating for some time, and the issue has, keeps coming up, whereby he needed me to validate him constantly, and being who I am and doing the work that I do, I found it really difficult, and there was no way I could do that. So I told him, you know what, you really need to go for therapy. This is not working out, right? And time again, I had to tell him that this is not working. I'm not your therapist. You cannot expect me to play that role for you. There is no way, right? So it got really unhealthy, because then I'll be feeling like I need space, because I felt suffocated. So relationships become so difficult when we don't address the key issues. Now, obviously, this relationship died. It died right at the beginning, to be honest, because of the incompatibility, right, in terms of understanding and consciousness work and the psychology. So is really tough. As much as there were a lot of things that we had in common, there were many things that we did not have in common. And I feel, after my many experiences, from relationships to even a marriage that did not work out, I feel, and through observation, I realized that we do not necessarily have to have anything in common. We don't have to have any interest in common, but the level of consciousness and your psychology has to match. If that matches, and matches in the sense that it doesn't mean that we need to be at the same level, but there must be earnest wanting to work on one's psychology, right? If that matches, then everything else solves itself, because you can have different interests, but then your psychology plays such a big part, right? And willingness to address trauma and wounds is really so important as well. Okay, so with that, let me just explain a little bit about shadow work, right? Inner child shadow work. And shadow work, I've talked about shadow work, right, in one of our live stream. And inner child is a big part, because the inner child holds so much of our wounded self, and some of the things that we experience in our lives, like feeling hurt, feeling pain, and all that. I mean, we could have been, we could be in our 20s and 30s when we experience the pain, but the pain is still lodged within the inner child consciousness, right? So the pain is still in the inner child, even though we experience the pain when we are grown up, because the inner child consciousness is like our base, where our emotional self resides, where our vulnerable self resides. And this part of ourselves has to be looked after with tender, loving care. And this part of ourselves is like a real, actual child, that we need to treat this child lovingly, with discipline, with firmness. And so oftentimes people say, oh, but I don't have children, so I don't need to learn parenting skills. That's not true. Every single one of us has a child living inside us, and we need to know, right, whenever we are responding to someone else, we need to know whether, okay, who was the one, which of my personalities, right, was responding to this person or to my partner. Oftentimes it is the inner child, right? The inner child would like to bite back. The inner child would like to retaliate. The inner child could be wounded. The inner child wants attention. The inner child is needy. The inner child, all of these things, right? So the inner child acts up. So in doing inner child work, essentially, I'm helping my clients and my students to grow up, right? I know this sounds strange, because you could be a 50 or 60-year-old person and you have not grown up. Physically, you have grown up, but your consciousness hasn't grown up. Or rather, you have not learned how to parent your inner child. So a lot of the work that we do, right, is to understand the difference between the inner child that is behaving, that is talking, that is making decisions versus the inner parent. So the inner parent has to almost be like the guide, to guide the child and to make decisions and to play that role where it is balancing itself really well, being loving at the right time, being firm, being disciplined, right? So let me just give you a very simple example. Like you set a goal for yourself that you need to be more disciplined in your exercise or in your dieting or in your health in general. And so you say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to go for a run. But you wake up the next day and then you feel like, oh my God, I really don't feel like running. I feel so lazy. I just want to lay in bed, right? And then you continue sleeping. So what has happened there is your inner child has made that decision. Your inner child has decided that I'm not important enough to have better health. I just want to sleep in. And your inner parent has abdicated responsibility. Your inner parent has given in to the inner child and said, yeah, forget it. So your inner parent has decided to just hide and not play its role to get you up to do what is necessary and what is healthy for you. Right? So we have these multiple personalities within our consciousness, and each plays a role. So when we give in time and time again to a part of us that doesn't feel like doing anything and just want to like, okay, I'm just going to laze, I'm not going to, then we're not allowing or we're not listening, we're not taking the guidance of the firm and loving inner parent. Okay. In the next class, I will talk about the different aspects of the inner parent, because there are three. It's like your inner parent has split personalities, yeah? So you have three types of inner parent. Even the inner child, there are three types of inner child. I think it will be too much to talk about today, so I'm just gonna in general tell you about inner child and inner parent. All right, so all of these different aspects of us, right, they determine the kind of choices that we make in our lives. They determine, oftentimes, we may mistaken that prompting inside us as a spiritual guidance. And this is so common, right? In the spiritual movement, New Age movement, people often say, oh, my intuition tells me that I need to do this or I need to do that. But the reality is, it is not that intuition. They're listening to the promptings of the inner child, right? And I see this happening very, very often as well, where people say that the inner child is filled with wisdom and they have to listen to the inner child. That's not necessarily true. Okay, so we do have an inner child consciousness within us, and if it's not wise, then what is it for? Essentially, the inner child consciousness carries the archetype energies of innocence. We all need that innocence. Why? We need to be able to wake up in the morning and look at the sunrise and be wowed by it. That's innocence. We need to, every morning look forward to a sunrise and go like, oh my, this is beautiful. The sunrise is beautiful. Where does that come from? It comes from the innocent part of ourselves, right? It comes from the part of ourselves that feels like, looks at the world in wonder, like, wow, such a beautiful rainbow. Look at the sky, look at the trees, right? So this part of ourselves enable us to feel joy, to feel happiness. So the inner child consciousness and the innocence archetype, they are very closely linked. And in order for innocence to serve us well, we need to have wisdom, or else we become naive. And when we become naive, what happens? You know what happens, right? We get scammed, we make silly decisions, we fall apart, we don't know how to deal with things. So the innocence has to be balanced with wisdom. So just like the inner child, we need to have this inner child because it helps us to retain a sense of wonderment, a sense of like, looking at good things in life, looking at the world through the eyes of innocence. But that has to be balanced with the inner parent, right? The inner parent needs to guide the child. The inner parent needs to steer the child in such a way that when it comes across a person who is narcissistic, for example, then the inner parent has to steer the child away and say, no, not that way, let's go this way, right? Not today, we're not dealing with that today, let's go this direction. So the inner parent has that role to play where it steers the inner child in the right direction that would serve the wholeness of you. Okay, so that's why the inner child is so important. The inner child allows us to feel love. The innocence and the purity of that comes from the inner child. But if the inner child is wounded, then it's so difficult, right, to access that sense of wonderment. If you're depressed, when you go out and look at the sun or the rainbow, it's not going to make you feel the sense of wonderment, right? You're just going to look at it and you feel jaded. You're going to say like, oh, okay, it's just the stupid sunrise, right? I see the sunrise every day. What's the big deal, right? So it can be very jaded that way if you are filled with a lot of wounds, right? You're not able to see the wonder of the planet and the world, okay? So that's why it's so important to address the darkness, the wounds, and all of that, okay? So let me check my notes. Now, when we do our shadow work, what it does is we are throwing light into our trauma. And when we throw light into our trauma, we can see things much more clearly. We have greater self-awareness. And when we have greater self-awareness, we can access our inner wisdom. And this is where, the personality, right? So for example, I have my inner child who's wounded. And then I consciously work on the shadow aspects, right? I consciously work on the issues. And when I do that, I throw light into the darkness. So when I throw light into the darkness, that's the inner child, right? Begin to like access greater levels or greater depths of positive emotions. And when then me, Shamla, as the person, can then see like, oh wow, if I do that, right, then I see things much more clearly. And then me, Shamla, as a person, can then access greater wisdom and guidance from my own higher self. If the inner child is covered in darkness and not able to access or not able to see clearly or not able to feel love, then it's very difficult to connect with the divine. All right. So all of these different parts of us, the personalities within us, has to work together like a team. And the one that is piloting it is always the conscious self, right? So like the conscious Shamala has to be the one to be the pilot, to say, let's say I wake up in the morning and then I see the beautiful sunrise, and then I allow the inner child to feel the joy, right? I allow the inner child to come up and like, hey, look at that beautiful sunrise. I can see the rainbow. I can see, all of that, feeling the excitement and allowing the inner child to feel it. So me, as the conscious person, consciously allows. And so always remember, you are the pilot in your life. And you have all of these different personalities within you that you need to work with, right? And you need to choose who you're going to listen to. Because sometimes you have the critical inner parent that may come up. Are you going to choose to listen to the critical inner parent at a time when you need to be very confident? The critical parent is going to just say you're not good enough, you are this, you are that, all the terrible things. And if you choose, as the pilot, if you choose to listen to that critical inner parent, your inner child is going to retreat, right? It's going to be so wounded. It's going to retreat and go like, okay, I can't do this. And then you, the pilot, did not choose well. You, the pilot, chose to listen to the critical inner parent. So as the conscious person, as the pilot, you have an ability to choose who you want to listen to at any point in time, right? And so then you get on with your life so that you are functional. You choose the right voice to listen to. Now, having said that, it's also important to carve out time after that, in your inner processing work, and to ask yourself, oh, why did that inner parent say that to me this morning? I'm so glad I did not listen to her voice. But where did that come from? Why did she appear? So this is where your inner process has to come in. This is where you have to question and develop greater self-awareness, and you want to shine light into that darkness and to investigate, like, why? Why did the inner parent say that? Why did the critical inner parent surface to try to sabotage me? All right. So there are two things in which we need to do, right? Which means we need to be functional in the world. We need to choose the right voice to listen to at any point in time in our lives. And then we need to do the inner process. Okay, the inner process is something that most people don't do. So time and time again, they will say to themselves, oh, okay, I make a conscious choice to do this. But then they don't address why. Why did that voice surface? Why did that critical voice come up? Why is it coming up so often? And how do I make a better decision the next time? And so the more we are able to have, the more inner processing work that we do, the more or the lesser the voice of the critical inner parent will surface, because you are not, or you have a greater understanding of how it operates, and you give it less power, and you give more power to another aspect of the inner parent, which is the firm and loving inner parent, to play a much more major role, in your life. Okay, so I want to share with you some practical tips, okay, that you can utilize. One of the key things that I teach my clients and my students is this thing called dialogue or journaling, where we investigate. So let's say you had a fight with someone that you're very close to. It could be your spouse, it could be someone that you're very close with. And you decide that you want to investigate which part of yourself is wounded. And so you start a dialogue process, right? You write it down. I would encourage writing rather than typing, because when you're writing pen and paper, right, it activates a different part of your brain, and it helps you get in touch with your emotions, your feelings, right? So it's a bit different, okay? So I would encourage you to write. And so when you write, you are essentially like writing a script. So in the dialogue process, you can maybe allow the conscious self, right? So the pilot, to first begin the dialogue, and you can say, all right, I want to invite my inner child to come into this dialogue. I want to know why my inner child was so wounded in the argument. Why did she feel defeated, or why did she feel so angry? Whatever the emotions that you experience, right? You want to do an investigation. And so you ask the inner child to tell you, how she feels, and all that. Just let her express. And so you do this on paper, right? So you write, it could be however long it is. And then you thank the inner child, right? The pilot thanks the inner child and say, okay, thank you for sharing how you feel. Now, the role of this journaling and dialogue process is to investigate. You're not there to try to, in your dialogue process, you don't have to say, oh, I hope you feel better soon, or you're not there to make the inner child feel better. That's not the point of the dialogue process. And I'll tell you why in a second. The whole point is to investigate. And then when you read the dialogue after, right, and you look at what the inner child has said to you, you may realize that some parts of what has come up in the dialogue is not necessarily the inner child. It could be another aspect of you. It could be a critical inner parent that has chimed in. And so your job, right, in a dialogue is to, after you've written, right, you take a red marker and you go through and you go like, this doesn't sound like the inner child. This, I feel, sounds like a critical inner parent, because the inner child is so angry with that person I argued with, that this inner child is criticizing this person. So that essentially is not an inner child consciousness. The one who is critical comes from the critical inner parent. So then you highlight it, right? So the whole dialogue, you can see which one is the child speaking, which one is the critical inner parent, which one is, and all of that. And this is why, for that reason, when you're doing a dialogue process, your role there as the pilot is not there to say, oh, I hope you feel better, because you don't know who you're actually speaking to until the whole dialogue process is done. So if you go on and say, oh, inner child, I hope you feel better soon, and blah, 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 trying to appease the inner child, right? Then you are encouraging the critical inner parent to keep on doing what it is doing. So we don't want to tread into that territory, right? We don't want it to do that. So the dialogue process is really for you to put on your investigative hat. You want to know, right, where is it coming from? So after you have done that, right, you have done you highlighted, oh, this is the critical inner parent talking. The critical inner parent is so critical of this person. Then you need to then ask yourself, does this voice sound familiar? Where have I heard this voice before? Is this voice a voice that I heard when I was growing up? Is it from my father, my mother? Is it from my teacher, my grandparent, right? And then you ask yourself, how often has this critical voice spoken to you in your mind on a daily basis? How often does it come up? How often does it criticize you time and time again? Right? It is like a broken record playing in your mind, criticizing you constantly. And that needs to be addressed. Right? That needs to be addressed. So that's one tool that you use, the dialogue process. Dialogue or journaling process. The other thing also you could do, of course, is meditation, right? Where you go, where you do a visualization, where you, the conscious self, the pilot, goes into the visualization, and you look for the inner child, and you spend some time with the inner child, and you comfort the inner child. So if you feel and you know that the inner child is wounded, then it's important for you to get into that space where you are, caring for the inner child. And you do it through visualization, you do it your feelings, right? So it's a self-care practice. Okay, and you can visualize yourself hugging the inner child, right? So, am I still? I just heard a sound. Okay. Hang on a second. Let me just quickly check. Okay. Never mind. We'll ignore that. Okay. So, so the visualization helps us to get in touch with this part of our consciousness. And in the work that we do, it's not enough, unfortunately, to just appease the inner child in visualization. We still need to do the investigative work. We still need to know how, sorry, it says that I'm muted. So in visualization work, we need to find out, right, why, sorry, technical challenge here. Okay, I think I'm okay now. In visualization work, we go in and we connect with the inner child, we connect with the energy, and we embrace our inner child with compassion, embrace our inner child with love, and we allow the inner child to feel safe in our arms, so to speak. And we allow the inner child to essentially, as the pilot, right, we want to hold space for the inner child and to allow the inner child to understand that this is a safe space. And if we do not create that safe space, then the inner child will retreat. Right? I'm sure you've seen people in your life where they are they're not flexible people. They're very, very strict, and they are like, you don't see them being flexible in any way. You don't see them smile. You don't see them. It's like there is no joy in their lives, right? That's because the inner child consciousness in them is so suppressed, is so denied, and is pushed aside that they cannot see, the joy in life. They can no longer enjoy, right, the nice things in life. Then, of course, you also see another part of maybe some friends you have who are completely run by the inner child, right? Their habits, their lifestyle, everything is run by the inner child. They do whatever they like because they feel like it, and there is no discipline. They don't know how to be firm with themselves, and then they do all these things at the detriment of their own health. And then they fall sick, and then, maybe or maybe not, that they may realize that it is all choices that they have made to bring them to that space where they are no longer healthy. Health could be psychological, emotional, of course, mental and spiritual health, right? So that ability to balance the inner child and the inner parent, it's so important because it makes us healthy. It protects us. It allows us to do what is right for us. All right? So the visualization is a space where we can express compassion, express love, hold space for the inner child, and allow the inner child to know that you are there to help it to cultivate greater self-love and have healthier relationship. When you have a healthy relationship with yourself, your relationship with your partner is going to be healthier as well. Either that, or you realize that the relationship is no longer working and it has become toxic, and then you make the decision to leave the relationship. And that is also a healthy decision, right? If it no longer serves you. So, one question here that I received, which I would like to address, is how can I use inner child work to improve my relationships with others? I feel this is such a good question because it really points to the fact that we need to have a healthy relationship with ourselves before we can have a healthy relationship with other people. And a healthy relationship with self means having the right discipline to do the right thing, to treat self with love and compassion, and to have clear boundaries, right? The boundaries with self means like, okay, I know where the boundary is when I know I need to be more disciplined. So my boundary is, like talking to the inner child, like, okay, waking up in the morning and the inner child doesn't want to exercise, then that boundary, right, has to be established. And you say, look here, we've had 8 hours of sleep, no more snoozing, right? And so we need to get our butt out of bed and go out there and do what is needed. That firm boundary with the inner child, and not allow the inner child to run our lives. Now, in relationships with other people, especially with partners, if we do not have a clear established boundary with our partners in life, then that can create a lot of problems. And then it can escalate into unhealthy, toxic connections. And, most of the time people also have a really wrong idea about relationships, right? I mean, the most common ones I often hear is, if you love me, then you would know what I need. If you love me, then you would understand exactly, what I need. If you love me, then why do we need boundaries? Now, all of these things are really unhealthy and very toxic, right? And usually people who say this have no idea that it's toxic. They have no idea they're coming from an unconscious part of themselves that is so toxic that they are damaging themselves and their relationships. They have no idea. So people like that really need to learn, right? Need to understand self, need to go on a journey to understand self much more. Because having this idea that if you love me, then you should know what I need. If you love me, you will do this for me, is really childish, right? It comes from the part of self that is the inner child speaking, essentially, and the adult grown-up self, right? The inner parent has disappeared. The inner parent is not in the scene to teach the inner child that it is not anyone else's job to do this, right? And to take back responsibility, to grow up. And so the this is so sensitive to address because I know this is so common. Almost everyone in relationships will say this to their partners when they're angry, when they're having a fight, and they use this as a weapon. And it's such a sensitive topic to address because the reality is people don't want to take back responsibility and say to themselves like, oh my God, what I just said was so toxic, right? And it is tough to take back responsibility and go like, oh my God, what did I just say? Why did I say that? Why did I think that? Right? It's also programming from society. I mean, the more people believe in this, the more people will do it. And then the fairy tales, the books that we read, I mean, all those things, right? They don't help at all, right? And all the dramas that we watch on television, on Netflix, or the Korean dramas, the romance, cheap local production as well, they don't help at all because they promote all of these unhealthy, toxic relationships. And we think they are right because it is common. Just because it's common doesn't make it right. And most of the time when it's common, it is not right. Psychologically unhealthy. Okay? So if you have done this, where you have said this to your partner, I'd like you to think back. Like, why did I say that? Was I so needy that I refuse to take back responsibility and I expect my partner to know things, right? I was in a relationship once when this guy told me that if we love each other, why do we need boundaries? Why do you have such clear boundaries? Do you not want me in your life? I say, in order for this relationship to work and for me to want you in my life, I need to have this clear boundary. Without this, then everything is going to fall apart. And I know that. And of course, it did not go down well. So people who feel you're being selfish when you have clear boundaries is a very clear sign that they are unhealed, they are toxic, that they are being selfish without realizing that they're being selfish, and they don't have, the psychological boundaries. That's a red flag. All right, it's a red flag. And that red flag means you need to make a decision, either to work through the relationship with each other or to leave and then spend time working on yourself. Now, I'm not encouraging people to leave their relationships just randomly and easily. It's not an easy decision. But ultimately, you need to think about your own mental health. And you take time, right, to process this. Like, how much of this do I want to work through? How healthy am I in the first place? If I'm not healthy and I blame the other guy for not being healthy, then something is wrong, right? So if I'm not healthy, I have to take ownership. Like, okay, I'm not healthy. That guy is equally not healthy. Okay, we are maybe on the same level, but maybe I'm more conscious, so I need to work on my stuff, right? And when I work on my stuff, then I will relate to the other person differently. When I can hold space and relate to the other person differently, then I can hold space for the relationship and up to a point, right? And if you feel that you love this person so much that you can hold space and that you can live with it, where The person can never ever match you in consciousness, but you're okay with it, right? Because you have reached a level of your consciousness where you can, that your focus is really on your personal development. Your focus is on, your self growth, and you don't have expectation that this person is going to fulfill some need of yours, right? Then maybe the relationship can work, but you have to be the bigger person, okay? And so it is tough in relationships. When you have a better relationship with yourself, ultimately your relationship with others, especially your more intimate relationships, will improve. And sometimes when you get to a healthier space, you will see much more clearly what types of relationships you need to let go. And that could mean the more intimate relationships. That could also mean friendships that you need to let go of because they no longer serve you. They could be hindering your growth, your process, then you need to let go of those. You need to find new friends, new people. When you're in a healthier space, you need a healthier environment. If you're a healthy person and you're in an environment that is not healthy, it doesn't serve you in the long term. You're gonna get really, really drained. All right. But of course, it boils down to priority as well, right? Because let's say your parents, right? I'm going to use the example of my own parents. So my own parents, they're both in their 80s. And, obviously they grew up in a time where it was so different, right? They grew up in a time when, Second World War was happening. So who in that generation would have done like deeper therapy work, especially in the Asian context, right? So they've not done any of this work. So caring for them, it's interesting, right? I think I shared this in my previous live stream, but I want to talk about this in the context of inner child. So looking at both my parents, I know very well, because they grew up in difficult times, that they both have inner child issues, unresolved, and it will never be resolved in their lifetime. And I know that, right? And I'm realistic about that. But for me, as a person, I do need to work on my, how they parented me, and how, some of the hang-ups that I've inherited, and how do I work through them. So I work through them, right? And so when I spend time with them, I take care of them. I spend time with them. I have to be very conscious that when the things they say to me sometimes, it comes from their inner child, and I know that, and so I don't take it personally. I just let it slide. I don't pick a fight. I don't feel it's necessary, because I know it comes from the wounded part of themselves. And there is no way for them to address this. They don't have the psychological capacity to be able to do that. So I have to let it slide. And then I behave as a grown-up, not as a child towards them. I behave as a grown-up. And I take care of them from that space, right? And I make sure that they are, physically, they're fine. I take care of their health. I take care of their wellness. So I just make sure that they're fine. So in relationships, right, answering that question, when we work on healing ourselves, our relationship will improve. And depends on how much you value the relationship. Obviously, I value the relationship with my parents. So then I put in the effort, right, to really be very vigilant when I'm with them, that I don't come from a space of a child. I have to come from a space of a grown-up, right? And so if there are relationships in your life where you feel like, okay, it's really not worth the time and the effort to try to, to be in that space where they're constantly being in the inner child consciousness, then you need to make a decision, right? So it depends on how, the value of the relationship. And if it's a relationship that has no value, where there is no value that you get from it, then it's fine, let it go. Okay, I'm going to answer this question. There is a part of me that can play the superhero role, wanting to save my partner, this would be an injured child, right? Yes. So you want to save your partner is because it's a trauma response. Okay. So in my live streams, whenever you ask me questions, I will be super honest. All right. I don't want to hold anything back, because I feel like holding back and trying to be politically correct in my answers does not serve anyone. It doesn't help you either. So I'm going to be, yes, it is a trauma response, which means that it is a part of you that needs to be healed, where when you were growing up, or whenever you needed help, you did not get the help, and that wound inside you is still there. And so it's a trauma response that when you see other people injured, you would want to rescue them. And this can ultimately become very unhealthy, because if your partner rejects you and does not want you to play the superhero role, that wounded part of yourself is going to feel misplaced. You are going to feel like, I don't know what I will do in this relationship right now. I don't know where I fit, right? And so then resentment can build. Okay? That energy of wanting to be a superhero should be directed to self, which means that you need to work on your wounded self. You need to heal that part of yourself. You need to address what is it that you have not addressed. Okay, I hope this makes sense for you. Okay, I welcome questions. Anyone else, if you have questions, please type them in while I address one more question that I receive. Okay, I'm going to answer these two questions together. First question is, what if I'm afraid to confront my inner child wounds? And the other question is, how do I know if I need to seek professional help for my inner child wounds? Right? You would need to seek professional help if you are afraid to confront your inner child. Okay? Now, that's these two questions go hand in hand, right? So if you do not if you're afraid to confront your inner child wounds, then you need to seek professional help. And if the fear, right, is a sign that your inner child, or rather your inner parent is missing, your inner child consciousness has gone into hiding, your inner parent consciousness has gone into hiding, the pilot, the conscious you, the person, has abdicated responsibility. It's not there for you. And you are possibly being run by the inner child. All right? Honest answer here. Okay? So this means that you really need to seek professional help. You really need to seek help to work through this. You need to work with, and the other thing also, the inner child often wants quick fixes. It wants miraculous answers or fixes. It's not going to happen. No miracles here. You need to work your way through with a professional. Okay? If those of you who need professional help, you can drop me an email. Okay? Because I do, a big part of my work is to help people grow up. I know this sounds strange, but it's really helping you to parent your inner child, right? And to work through the wounds. Okay? So I'm going to answer this question. After losing my husband, I found myself in deep grief. I cried for 2 years. As a parent, should I have acknowledged the pain and comforted the wounded child? Yes. Yes. The grief process, of course, is really challenging, right? I'm not sure whether you have gone for therapy to address this, but I would highly encourage you to do it if you have not. Because I don't know your history. I don't know where you are right now in terms of the grieving process. And so I don't want to go into space where we go into regret, like, oh, I should have done this, oh, I should have done that, right? I mean, that's not why we're here. But I would say, moving forward, if you have not done any therapy work for your grieving process, you should. all right? And when you have done the grieving process, then you go into inner child work, and that's possibly a combination of work that needs to be done, like grief management and also addressing inner child, because the inner child is possibly also very, very wounded from the loss, and the inner child doesn't know, right, where to gravitate towards. And the other thing also is to explore the dynamics between your relationship with your husband, because we don't know at this point, I mean, from what you're sharing, we don't know at this point whether there is any projection of the parenting role onto your husband. Again, this is very common, yeah? It's not a judgment when I say any of these. Whatever I've said to you is not a judgment. It's basically, if we have not done any inner child work, we don't know how, right? We have not learned how. And oftentimes we project the parent role onto our partners, and we expect our partner to be our parent, right? And that's why the saying, right? We marry our parent, right? Because we have unresolved issues, and so we hope to continue in the healing process, and that's why we choose our parents, somewhat, like a parent that's somewhat a parent-like figure, right? So there's a lot of projection. So that's why more work is needed for you, because if you have to investigate into whether you have projected the parent role onto your husband, then the grief process is even deeper, because then, like, what now, right? The parent is missing. What now, right? So it's very, very delicate work. It will take time, but it is very fruitful. All right, that's what I can tell you in this work. Okay. Now I'm gonna answer the next question. I recently come across this modality that uses superconscious to bring about healing without the need to talk or address the inner child issues. Do you think it can possibly work? No, it's delusional. Okay, no judgment against whoever created this. Unfortunately, this is much more common than I care to like, which has really, really, is a distraction, and it has really created a lot of problems for people on the spiritual path. And oftentimes they go for these things, they don't really address the key issues, and essentially it's a quick fix, right? Use the superconscious to bring about healing. How? You can't access your superconscious without addressing the wounds. How can you possibly have access to superconsciousness if the shadow is so dark, if the shadow is hindering the view, right? It's just unfortunate that there is so many of these kind of modalities, just too many of these kind of modalities out there that has driven people astray. People just go astray and thinking they have healed. And I told my students this just the other day. The minute you say, I'm healed from this, it means you have not. That's the most obvious clue as to whether you have healed, because the work that we do is lifelong. You don't just overnight heal from this and say, okay, I've already healed, I can move on. No, it's a lifelong process. And the thing is, inner child work is a lifelong process, because we have to keep monitoring, right? The inner child consciousness, when it's acting up, when it's wounded, because we do get hurt. Even if we become enlightened, we do get hurt, right? And the thing is, when you become enlightened, you get hurt, you have the tools to manage. So the healing process is faster because you know how to manage it, you know what to do. It doesn't mean that once you become enlightened, you don't get hurt, I think that's a false belief as well in the spiritual movement, that you become, you're so enlightened that you're not, nothing hurts you, right? That's delusional. You're human. As long as you're human, no matter what level of consciousness you are at, you may not show that you're hurt because you have a better able to manage it, right? You're not going to like suddenly break down and cry in public, right? Because you are able to manage it much better, but it doesn't mean that you're not hurt. You can still be hurt. You just know how to manage it better. As long as you're in a human body, you will be hurt because people will hurt you. People will say the nastiest things to you, no matter what level of, and the other thing very common in New Age is that they will say things like, oh, because you attracted this lesson to you. And that's why, you think you're so enlightened, but maybe you're not, because you attracted this lesson to you, and that's why you're hurt. Not necessarily true. You can be very enlightened and you hold light, and people still can attack you because they don't like your light. And you can be hurt in the process. And how do you then manage, right? This is where you really need to parent yourself, right? You need to go into the work that you need to do with the inner child. So it's so important that we understand that there are steps in the process. We cannot bypass our pain and try to access wisdom and light and love and superconsciousness and healing and all of that, and thinking that they will automatically be wiped out or taken away by our superconsciousness. Right? So when I say these things, right, those healers in the New Age movement, they often attack me for saying this. But I know it needs to be said because there are just far too many offering these quick fixes. I mean, it's a process. It needs to be worked through. It needs to be worked on. Energy work is just energy work, right? So when people say they I often tell my clients, right, when they want energy work done. So I can give you energy work. I can clear those energies, but they will come back. I often say they will come back if you don't address the psychological work. And oftentimes they still choose to do energy work. And I often say, I think you've had enough energy work. You should choose the other service that I offer, which is the psychological work. And they don't come back because it's just too much. It's just too much work. They just want to feel good and high, right? Like, oh, okay, I feel good already. But it will come back. It doesn't go away so quickly, okay? And the wounds not addressed can escalate, and it will come back at a time when you are most vulnerable. And oftentimes, and that's why we always hear stories of people, right? Like it doesn't rain, it pours, right? Like when you go through something in your life and you go through an issue, right? And then more happens. Then you go like, oh my God, why? Why isn't more? It's happening. And because when you're at a point of vulnerability, all these issues, right, will come up. It's a loop. It's like this, a part of your consciousness say, okay, free for all now. Everybody come up. All these issues. So it's just pause, right? And if you're not equipped, if you're not able to have the wisdom to hold and to handle, then you find yourself falling apart. And that's why I often tell people, address these things before you are traumatized. Address these things before you hit a roadblock, right? So you are in, it's like you have greater control over it when things are going well. When things are going well in your life, this is when you need to do your process. Don't wait till things get so serious, that things get so, everything is falling apart. And then you address them, because then you and the person working with you have to unpack so much. And when the unpacking is so much, it becomes heavier. And that's where you feel like you need to avoid it more. And that's how it is, right? That's the human part of us. So address issues when you feel like, okay, nothing wrong is happening in my life right now. Maybe I need to address some of the things that I know I need to address, but I've been avoiding them. Do it when things are well. Then you are in a better space to work through them, and you find that you can work through them with greater ease, and it's faster, and you see more clearly, right? So don't wait for things to fall apart, okay? So it's a lifelong journey. Yes, humans being human, you only do it when the pain is greater. Exactly, exactly. But this is a life hack that I'm sharing with you. Don't wait for things to get so painful. Do it when it's not so painful. Then is the process is much easier, right? I know it sounds like, oh yeah, common sense, but it's not so common when we're going through it, right? It doesn't feel that way. Okay. So what's the time now? Okay, I'm gonna wind down the session. I'll possibly do the next live stream next week because I don't want to leave too big a gap to address part two. Part three, maybe we can wait a while, because part two is I want to really talk about the different aspects of our inner child and inner parent. Okay, so that you can use the tools and you can go in your process. Okay, so to wind down, I just want to share what we've covered today. We talk about dialoguing, we talk about journaling, we talk about you being the conscious self, right? You being the conscious self, and you make decisions, you choose who to listen to. We talk about the importance of inner child consciousness and why the inner child is so important to keep alive, to keep healthy, to keep loving, to have compassion, to have joy, right? And why it's so important to parent ourselves. And the process of being human is learning to grow up. Are we operating from inner child, inner parent? Where are we operating from? All of these we need to understand. Visualization, okay, I shared today. Visualization to appease or to work with the inner child, to nurture the inner child, to hold space for the inner child. There are more questions that were sent to me, but I will address them in the next class. All right, so if you have more questions for me, you can always drop me an email for the questions, and I will answer them in the next live stream. And I'm happy to see more of you attending the live stream with me, and I will keep on doing it, hoping more people will join us in next time. And so details about next live stream will be up via email or in this YouTube channel. So I will see all of you again very soon. Okay, take care, have a wonderful weekend ahead, and I will sending you lots of love, and take care of the inner child. Okay, bye for now.